the Rebel Alliance. So just a few words about Philip. So he's a writer and a social justice activist who's based in the greater New York area. And he's a founding member of the Buddhist Action Coalition in New York City, which is a pan-Buddhist social justice organization. And he's also a co-founder of the New York chapter of UK-based Animal Rebellion, which is a global climate and animal justice movement. Philip wrote an article about Animal Rebellion that was on the opendemocracy.net website, and it's titled, "Why Animal Justice is Crucial in Addressing the Climate Emergency." And Philip asked me to mention that Animal Rebellion is going to be active very soon in the September Rebellion that kicks off in the UK on September 1st. And you can find out more by going to the website animalrebellion.org for more information. So, Philip, the Zoom floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan. And special thanks to Vegan Options Canada and Animal Rebellion Turtle Island for welcoming me to speak with you all and be in community with you today. And especially to Alyssa for the invitation to come speak. And thanks to all who committed their time to be here today. You know, that's not something that I ever take for granted. And I appreciate it. I'm also especially grateful to be the opportunity to be in community with my fellow anti-speciesist animal advocates. So thank you for that. And it's really an honor to be here. So part of me was a little bit reticent to follow someone as skillful and learned as Jonathan. I come from the world of rock and roll. As a young guy, I ran an alternative rock and roll record label. And we're very conscious of who follows who. And I was very reticent and somewhat relieved when he didn't have a slide presentation, nor do I, which is spectacular and made me more self-conscious than I already am. So I'm glad to be here. And, you know, Jonathan, I just want to touch on a couple of things that he said about applied ethics. I think that's a really important, you know, point. You know, that faith without, to quote, you know, scripture, faith without works is dead. To really bring the message of anti-speciesism to the world is a really important piece. I appreciated going back to the concept of, Jonathan mentioned ahimsa, or non-harming, dynamic harmlessness. And as I mentioned in my brief bio there, I'm active in the Buddhist community and have been for a very long time. And that is a foundational concept in what are known as dharmic religions, which would be Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and yoga practices by extension. So something that Jonathan said, one more thing that I wanted to just mention, it really got me and kind of put a smile on my face, and I'll tell you why. He said, what really matters, the critical factor is what the feelings on the inside as opposed to what it looks like from the outside, right? So that felt experience, you know, of suffering, and it actually reminded me of a funny little story. And so I'm speaking to you from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is between Philadelphia and New York City. But I'm not from here. My wife is from here, and we moved here almost 4 years ago. I'm originally in Massachusetts, and that is a significant factor. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's significant in my life and my activism. And Jonathan's point about inside and outside reminded me of a funny comment by another Boston guy, comedian by the name of Stephen Wright. Some of you may know him, comedian, who became very well known in the 80s and later. And he's got a wry, kind of ironic sense of humor. And he said, you know, I woke up one morning and I was hustling to get out of the house and I couldn't talk, so I just grabbed two socks that were laying around, and I went out and I met my girlfriend. She said, "Hey, you have one of your socks is blue and one of your socks is brown. You have different socks." And he's like, because they're the same thickness. So the point of like the feeling, you know, what Matt, like all the intellectual and highfalutin and you know, have you, the intellectual piece of showing up to be, you know, an animal justice advocate, anti-speciesist is all well and good, but to never lose sight that the existential of suffering in the end of suffering, right? That's what that's the motive force for the way I try and show up. And so I'm going to be presenting for about another half an hour or so. I also want to mention that I may have some co-presenters because I'm joining you from my dining room adjacent to the living room where reside, now reclining restfully, are the 5 greyhounds with whom we share our home. So they may be joining us, just a little bit of a heads up there. So again, I mentioned being from Boston, Massachusetts, and I don't want to make more about that, but I don't want to make less about it either, because it's really a significant influence in the person that I become, particularly with my activism. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. Some of you may know Boston is referred to as, only half kiddingly, the first Irish city west of Cork, okay? So easily, you know, the very, very strong Irish population. The Irish culture very much forms the ethics and the ethos of the culture there. I can probably tell by my surname, my paternal heritage is Irish. It's the most common. Murphy is the most common in Ireland. It's Smith. So, so I come from Boston Irish, and my folks were raised in Boston in working class neighborhood. And I mention that because if you go to Vintage, you would necessarily be able to determine, like, because I personally do refer my family to university. You know, work in university, develop fundraising for some high, etc. And I grew up most of my life in a at the time in suburb was a labor leader. So everything that, you know,
Philip,
organized labor.
Philip, I think there seems to be some sort of audio problem at your end.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea? Is there anything you might be able to do about that?
Can you hear me now? Hang on. We've been impacted by Laura to a degree, so let me try something. If I lose you, I'll come back. Hello? Test. Testing, test 1, 2.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes? Okay. Sorry, I don't know if you heard me say that we're far enough south that we've been impacted by Hurricane Laura. So it's been, the weather has been messing with electricity, including internet a bit. So still good? Yes? Okay, cool. Why I mention this, so a couple of reasons. Primarily, like, my goal today is to be in community with my fellows, and that's a challenging thing in the world we're living in too. I've spent I have not been too far from my home with, shelter in place. So the interactions have been on Zoom, and it's been more challenging to connect with people with whom I can be in community, and certainly justice community I would consider a primary community for me. And to just, the other piece, kind of the broader piece here, is to really kind of speak to the importance of, within that, the messaging that is focusing on anti-speciesism as foundational to ending unnecessary suffering, right? So my point in mentioning my background is that I was raised in a culture of defiance, to put it simply. And as I mentioned, my dad was a labor union leader, and there were strikes, and there were sacrifices that were made to fight for the greater good, or what's right, or what's ethical in this country. And the other thing I wanted to say about the Irish culture is, the strong feeling, driver of resistance, and that continues to this day. People with respect to dialing in from the UK, I have a lot of affection for the UK, although that's it's love-hate in certain ways, and by that I mean, if I say to people, they're often very surprised to hear that the longest colonized country for the longest duration in the world is Ireland. Ireland has been colonized for 800 years to this very day, to this moment. And very few people realize that. So there's definitely a culture of resistance and fighting for what's right, and freedom, and free from harm, and for the ability to flourish. So that really informs the way that I show up. And I want to just take a quick minute to poem, and then we'll move off of this kind of framing. This is a poem called "The Heritage to the Race of Kings." I'm Joseph Mary Plunkett, an Irishman. This heritage to the race of kings, their children and their children's seed, have wrought their prophecies in need of terrible and splendid things. The hands that fought, the hearts that broke in old immortal tragedies, they have not failed beneath their children's head, refuse the yoke. And still the hand shall guard the sod that holds their father's funeral urn. Still shall their hearts volcanic burn with anger of the sons of God. No ancient sword shall earn his wage the entail of their blood and tears. No shameful price for peaceful years shall ever part this heritage. And if some of you may recognize the name, the author's name, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was only a few. The poem was written in the early 1900s, and it was prior to 1916. I can tell you that because the author was one of 8 men who were martyred in the Easter Uprising. They were publicly executed for rising against British rule. So all's to say, I take fighting for what's right and what's just very seriously, and that means taking unpopular positions at times. And I know I'm, in a sense, I'm preaching to the choir, saying this to folks here who care enough about anti-speciesism to be here today. So I've been active with Animal Rebellion virtually since its outset, and it was just almost a year ago to the day that Animal Rebellion was launched publicly at the official animal rights UK, which was on August 17th, I believe. And kudos to the event organizers, most notably Ed Winters, who's known on YouTube as Earthling Ed, who allowed the march to be the platform for the launching of Animal Rebellion. It was a week later in New York City where I marched. My knowledge was the first person to be showing up with Animal Rebellion signage in the US. So I find this to be interesting I hope and relevant, and I hope you do too. So, and some of you may know this, so I'll kind of do a quick version. That Animal Rebellion exists, was birthed out of, in a sense, Extinction Rebellion. So it shares Extinction Rebellion's demands and principles and values, and it came out of Extinction Rebellion, questioning within Extinction Rebellion of why isn't the animal question, if you will, being addressed, given that, as we know, in aggregate, so-called animal agriculture is the single great in the world, right? If you can, not just greenhouse gases, but, deforestation, all told, it is the single greatest detrimental factor to maintaining a viable ecosystem on which life depends, right? So, and it's definitely my experience in New York as well. I was active from the very beginning with Extinction Rebellion in New York City. And when I would raise the issue of animal agriculture, it was not welcome. It was not welcome. And being the Boston Irishman that I am, that was not, I didn't take that answer very, I didn't take it lying down. And I pushed, and that was, further resistance. And it led me to the point of saying, I'm going to find another venue for my activism, which was, and really, truthfully, was quite heartbreaking, because I really think that Extinction Rebellion is onto something, and they've had quite an extraordinary impact in a short period of time. So when I learned that there were folks, in the UK, so as I understand it, one of the members of Extinction Rebellion by the name of Dora Hardigai was a like myself, a voice within Extinction Rebellion for, centering, or at least including, animal agriculture, and taking contrary action to animal exploitation as being foundational. One of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, Hallam, tapped Dora and another friend of mine, Dan Kidby, who an acquaintance and a member of Extinction Rebellion, who is one of the co-founders of Animal Think Tank in the UK, to convene animal justice activists from around the globe in the UK, which was in June of 2019. That meeting happened, and that led to the creation of Animal Rebellion, which was again publicly launched in August of 2019. And in addition to co-creating the New York City presence for Animal Rebellion, I've also been working with people like Soren and Alyssa and others to spread the to establish additional chapters in North America of Animal Rebellion. So that's also been something that I've been working. So I'm very happy about being involved. I was really ecstatic when Animal Rebellion launched, and I've been fairly deeply committed to advancing both globally and in New York and in the US, or North America, I should say. I will also say, and this is like why I'm kind of emphasizing the focus on rebellion in a context such as this, which is so decidedly anti-species, is in the first principle of Animal Rebellion as it was originally articulated, the variant from the principle in Extinction Rebellion, not surprisingly, is a very specific focus on anti-speciesism. So I want to read briefly. So Animal Rebellion commits in stating its first principle to an anti-species that has a shared vision of change, and it goes on, creating a world that protects beings of all species for generations to come. Further on, in relation to our movement's culture, we are inspired not only by human action, but also animal resistance. And we believe in co-creating a world with individuals from all species for a just and secure future. So that was incredibly powerful and meaningful to me when Animal Rebellion first published their principles, or the variations on the principles. And that's in North America, we certainly take that commitment to anti-speciesism very seriously. Messaging, and if you go to the Animal Rebellion Turtle Island North America website, you'll see, in addition to the 3 demands, which are about governing the truth, zero carbon emissions by 2025, and establishing of citizens' assemblies to address the climate and ecological emergency. There's a 4th demand that focuses on compassion being extended to all sentient beings, which I find to be tremendously meaningful. And that brings in the piece, ahimsa, being, it's not simply justice, which I think can be a bit mechanical, or can be prone to, legal dissection, for lack of a better term. Compassion speaks to, empathetic with other sentient beings and feeling their suffering and taking action, because there's really, when that connection and compassion is experienced in a felt sense, there's nothing that one can do other than to extend compassion and kindness and respect to all sentient beings, right? So this is specifically articulated within Animal Rebellion's first principle. However, there's kind of a key, and just briefly for people who aren't aware of the kind of motive force for the Rebel Alliance, which includes Animal Rebellion and other affiliates, that nonviolent direct action is the means to achieve these demands, and that from research done by, most notably by a Harvard researcher by the name of Erica Chenoweth, saying that, who examined rebellions across the world and historically, and said that the research shows that a minimum of 3.5% of a given population being engaged could achieve being engaged in the streets, demanding change through nonviolent direct action, can actually achieve evolution. So in the short period of time that Animal Rebellion has existed, this is, significant. There's been already kind of a changing of the guard, if you will. The original core team members have transitioned, going back to some of the projects they were involved with TAP to launch Animal Rebellion. And my experience of the new regime, if you will, now it is a non-hierarchical distributed leadership, and all organizations, to fly, under the Animal Rebellion flag across the globe, if they honor the demand, it is non-hierarchical. Said a lot of the messaging and communications comes from the UK, and frankly speaking, the anti-speciesist message to this community, I will say emphatically, has been minimized to ignored. And the sense that I had from the related conversation, there's a fear of scaring people away with terminology like this and attendant, and that would extension undermine to achieve the 3.5%, which is kind of being viewed as a holy grail. And I challenge that. And so within the Rebel Alliance, as a member of Animal Rebellion New York City, my voice has been one of challenging this. And I think that's significant to speak to say to this community. I think it's probably the most important thing I can say today. And to encourage you to the extent that you want to be engaged with Animal Rebellion, and I hope that you all do. And I remain deeply committed to Animal Rebellion, but I am a voice of challenge. And I think there's a way to do that skillfully. And I want to come back to skillful means, which is a Buddhist concept that really informs being able to be exist both in and outreaching, and to do it skillfully so as to be most effective in the long term, by all measures. So that's been a big part of my work internally, and that's where I came. The title, "The Moral Conscience of the Rebel Alliance," is informed by this commitment. And I just want to take a minute to kind of pull back just a bit and speak a bit about why I think the role of being that moral conscience within the Rebel Alliance, and by extension, the movement of movements of which the Rebel Alliance positions itself, is just to really acknowledge the brute facts that all of us, live every day, which we're still so small, we're still so small. And to be part of, yes, contributing to that, trying to hit that 3.5% engagement is really significant. But in terms of being a voice to achieve that, I question, and frankly, it's heartbreaking because it just speaks to how small we still are, despite the growth. We're still such a small part of the population. So I'm of a mind, and this informs my commentary within Animal Rebellion, that we need to be the voice in order to achieve the commitment to plant-based, food system. So that's kind of the big picture messaging and the big goal, which is obviously an extremely important and noble goal within Animal Rebellion, is to achieve a plant-based food system. My argument is that if that is your goal, and it is a wonderful goal, to really have, for the message to have the weight and depth to move people to really commit to that goal and move towards it, that the animal justice, anti-speciesist message must not be marginalized. We cannot avoid, and there are, again, I'm once again preaching to the choir, they are difficult conversations. They're challenging conversations because we were all raised in speciesist culture, right? The people that I know that continue to consume animal products and use animals as commodities, tools, or instruments, by and large, they're not psychopaths, right? We were all born into a global speciesist society that says that this is, to use a Melanie Joy phrase, normal, natural, and necessary, right? So that's what we're up against. And I, as a reminder to myself, I will say things to myself and a lot act of, frankly, as an act of humility and as a way to really keep myself centered on being as effective as possible. And I want to kind of close with that, speaking about that. But I say things like, to this day, I've spent more of my life consuming animal products than not. Now that's going to change ideally. You know, I'm going to remain committed, which I am fully committed to anti-speciesist activism. So that's going to change over time. But at this moment in time, that is a fact, right? So, and I didn't do that because, you know, I'm a psychopath. I did it because this is what people do, unless they are educated, unless they are, unless the light of, you know, species violence illuminated by people like me and all of you. And I just want to wrap up my comments by saying, I know how difficult this is. It's so easy to say that, to be able to meaning to be an advocate for animals when you really, when it lands in your heart, the scope and scale, the depth of this, the violence and the attendant suffering, the scope and scale on a global level that this is. When it really landed, when it landed for me, it just, it's so devastating, and it's so easy. And I can, with some humility, say, certainly this was, you know, true for me, and I've had to go back and repair damage I did as the angry vegan. It's so easy to be angry, right? When that really hits and lands, it's like, you know, fury. First, for me, it was like, you lied to me. You me, right? And so, like, and I didn't ask the right questions, to be clear. So to really be able to take that energy and transmute that anger through skillful means, right? And that includes, for me, that includes leaning into meditation practice, right? Because it means being in community with other people and talking about this and sharing the way that we can be most skillful, so that when, you know, and there are many other, I think for me, the meditation practice is really central. Because if I go out, if I really want to serve the animals who are born into, you know, captivity, and, you know, including these 5 beautiful souls who for whom I and my wife serve as guardians, if I really want to be skillful, and I do want to bring that really challenging message of anti-speciesism, like what we do as a global culture is wrong, And to be able to communicate that message skillfully without alienating people for maximum effect, that's the art form, right? That's the art form of our work as activists. And I encourage everyone to take an activist stance in any way that you can for the animals. And I'm sure many, because that translation is so important, to bring compassion. So I'll just leave you with, you know, a brief kind of Buddhist meditation prayer on metta, which is loving kindness, one of the divine abodes, the Brahma Viharas, right? So metta is loving kindness. And to bring that not only to my fellow activists, not only the animals who suffer, but to all sentient beings without qualification. And that includes the people who harm animals. That includes the people who are engaging in speciesist violence. And that's really counterintuitive for me, based on all the conditioning and the history that I spoke about earlier. But I do it because I want to be an effective activist that I can. Because if I don't do that, then I'm making it about me. If I don't make that commitment, I'm making it about me and not the animals. And shame on me if I do that. Shame on me if I do that. So I'll just leave you, and we can open up some questions. So May all sentient beings be well, happy, skillful, and peaceful. Mahakaruna. Thank you all for your time.
Philip, thanks so much for your talk. I mean, I loved what you had to say, and I love your passion and the fighting Irish spirit that you've infused not just your talk but your activism with. I couldn't help thinking that's a very good sort of, you were talking at the beginning of your talk about, following up after mine, and there's a little bit of a yin-yang kind of complementarity between the things that we were talking about. And it struck me that even though I was saying things that, well, moral language, objectively, it doesn't have, let's say, objective, it's not an objective truth about moral obligation. And at the same time, when you see the depth of and the extent of animal suffering, there's at a very sort of raw, basic level, you just feel like yelling out to everybody, this is wrong. You cannot do that to a sentient being. And I just also wanted to say, I like that how you combine the principle of Buddhist compassion with this fighting spirit. And it reminds me of the title of my first book, The Battle for Compassion. It's this combination of the heart and the fighting spirit, because we're up against this tremendous challenge. So it's open to questions. So I'm looking in the chat here. If there's anyone who's posed a question and I haven't seen it yet, feel free to raise your hand. Nunu, do you have a question here in the chat, or do you want to, let's see?
Shall I read it?
I'm just looking for it. Sorry, I'm not being a very good moderator here. Oh, I have it here. Okay, so I'll read it. I can read it out loud here. So you're saying that, I'll read it verbatim. I have the same problem. Is that what the one that I'm, okay. So I have the same problem with Extinction Rebellion Barcelona. We have the science, the facts, and agriculture being the leading cause of climate change, and still they don't recognize us as part of them. So maybe now with the pandemic, that's changed a little, but how can we connect them with our cause? Do you want to answer that?
Sure, I'll take. Thank you, Nunu. And again, it's always kind of heartening to know that I'm not alone, and I've heard from several people, including some of my colleagues in Animal Rebellion New York City, about the challenge of engaging with Extinction Rebellion on this matter. I wish I had a perfect, simple answer, because if I did, I'd share it with the world and I would have applied it. Now I can say, I think to your point of the pandemic has given us, as if you will, a silver lining, in that the awareness of that this is that COVID-19 is a zoonotic illness, so it came from confining and killing animals for food. So I think that definitely has given us a talking point, I think. Yeah, and I think it's, again, coming back to showing up skillfully and just communicating the message. Like, if being armed with the facts, saying, and I come back to the Poor and Nemechek study, the meta-analysis from 2018 that says, eliminating meat and dairy is the single biggest thing you can do to cut down on your environmental impact, and to not be angry in doing it. And frankly, when I first showed up at Extinction Rebellion, it was challenging for me, and I had to go back and do some repair for some of the ways that I should. Like, finally, someone, a global movement is getting some traction in a way that using nonviolent direct action that other, that have not had the traction. The meteoric rise of Extinction Rebellion was extraordinary. So to be so heartened by that, and then come in and be met as I was as an animal justice activist, was very difficult. And it led to some strong emotions that I had to own that later. But I've been in, I have the good fortune that a good friend of mine from the New York City Buddhist community is also involved in Extinction Rebellion. So that was kind of a pathway for me, but to just be engaged, to show up with, I would show up with Animal Rebellion signs, Rebellion marches, things like that, and have information to share. And it has borne fruit in that we've got a new kind of cohort in New York City coming to Animal Rebellion who are all, vegan animal justice activists, but are coming out of Extinction Rebellion. And within, there's a channel on there. They use Basecamp as a kind of an organizing. And there's an Animal Rebellion based or oriented cohort at Extinction Rebellion, New York City. So reporting a little bit of success, hope that's inspiring, and, keep at it. I know it's hard. Cheers.
Okay, we've got a comment from Eleanor Carrara. I'll just read this. I turned vegetarian 40 years ago and vegan 4 years ago. And my experience and view is that the intensity and scale of cruelty has grown exponentially despite the activism and dissemination of the truth. That's very discouraging. Not sure what will really turn things around. Mm-hmm. Do you care to comment on that?
Sure. No, and in fact, that's a great point, and it gives me an opportunity to speak to the situation in the U.S. So I don't want to make more of it, but it's hard to make. It would be hard to make less of it. The tumult, broadly speaking, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this, and knowing that the seminar here is based out of Canada, I'll mention that there's a Canadian sociologist who wrote a really brilliant piece called The Unraveling of America that was published in Rolling Stone, which is the single best encapsulation of what's going on in America right now. And there was also see if I can find it and put it in the chat. I also put a Tom Reagan video that I highly recommend in the chat, but yeah, I'll try and find that and get it in the chat. So, and an aspect of that, of the challenging situation here in the States, and that's an understatement, that is not actually new, is very relevant, I think, to some tactics that very significantly apply in the US, which is the system of subsidies and bailouts that are afforded to meat and dairy farmers are, distort market forces in a way that undermine our efforts collectively to reduce the number of animals killed, right? So there's a bill called the Farm Bill, which is every 5 years, and that sets in place the subsidies that are going to be afforded to these industries. So if you're not familiar with it, there's a wonderful organization, actually a pair of organizations, kind of sister organizations, called the Vegan Justice League and the Agriculture Fairness Alliance. And they were founded by two women, Connie Spence and Laura Reese, here in the US. And the impetus for founding these organizations, so one's in education, Vegan Justice League is education, and this is because of the tax code in the US. You can take tax advantageous gifts, but for education and nonprofit mission at advancing, but you can't take tax advantageous money for political lobbying. So they set up an education group and a sister lobbying group, because what they realized was that big ag, animal ag, is devoting a lot of resources, substantive resources, in the form of funding for lobbyists in Congress in order to impact the contours of the Farm Bill. So from this is some pretty staggering numbers. from the vegan justice. Invested in most recent data available $18 million in lobbying in Congress in Washington, D.C. And that yielded $38 billion in direct and indirect subsidies. So that's a 2,100% return on investment on the lobbying expense. Estimate, the meat industry's cost the U.S. taxpayer $414 billion a year. And the other really significant data point back to the situation we find ourselves in with the pandemic, the stimulus packages under this administration that deemed meatpacking employees, who are some of the most abused and workers on the face of the earth, as essential workers, right? Within these large stimulus payouts to corporate America broadly, within that are huge additional funds devoted to animal agriculture, propping up animal agriculture. And why this is significant is that, and I mentioned this just briefly, it's worth mentioning again, like it undermines everything we're trying to do, because these farmers, there are no economic consequences for overproduction, right? So that is hugely problematic. And in the U.S., I've been in conversation with Connie Pence. We're looking to advance discussions about how, in addition to nonviolent direct action, how back to the skillful means, how animal rebellion and animal rights organizations more broadly in the U.S. can support the Vegan Justice League and the Agricultural Fairness Alliance in advancing their goals. Because if we don't cut out those subsidies and bailout money, we're swimming against the tide in a pretty significant way. Thank you.
Philip, there's a question from Laura Lubrasso, very specific question. How does animal rebellion use the concept of sentience, if it is used?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So that language is not used as specifically, but my functioning understanding and by extension my advocacy is informed by an anti-speciesist stance that in turn is informed by sentient beings as being members of the moral community, right? So they have standing in the moral community. So I think it's really captured by anti-speciesism. And again, we're fighting that battle. I think it's implicit. I'm frankly personally hesitant to have that be part of the messaging, although in conversation I certainly come to that. And I was one of my other go-tos in terms of my own personal advocacy is the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness. So using consciousness and sentience as effectively, synonyms. So I hope that's helpful. It's focusing on anti-oppression in the form of anti-speciesism. And the other piece about in this moment in America that we're really exploring how to be as skillful as possible, because it's, as many of you probably know, if not all of you, it's kind of a fraught path to go down, which is to, talk about social justice and oppression being, animals, other animals. So I that's how I like to describe animals, because we're animals too, right? As opposed to using nouns and othering animals. It can be tricky, particularly in this moment in the U.S. with the horrific, racism and police violence that's literally virtually on a daily basis. Another story. I mean, it's absolutely horrific, and to communicate that a consistent anti-oppression extends to all sentient beings, by adopting an anti-species stance, to not have that be construed as being a comparator to oppressed human communities is very challenging, frankly, and it requires extreme skill. But that's really kind of the way that I attempt to do it. But it's really, I have a few really go to the Cambridge Declaration, and I shared in the chat. I hope you all can take a look at it. It's short YouTube video, 8 minutes long, by Tom Regan, who I'll mention briefly, the late Professor Tom Regan, who I would argue is as views on animal justice are as skillful or as any animal justice philosopher who has ever lived, in my opinion. And he's presenting in the Royal Institute as to a hostile audience rather, in the UK, making the case for animal rights. And it is the best short encapsulation of our message of anti-speciesism that I've ever encountered. So yeah, that's kind of where I land with that. I hope that answers your question. I wish I had a comprehensive and watertight answer, but it's evolving.
Okay, we're going to have to wind up within the next minute or two. So unless there are any other questions, unless anyone wants to squeeze in one last question. Any other questions? Going once, going twice? I think we'll, just to leave a little bit of time before the next talk. So I guess we'll wrap things up now. And Philip, thanks so much for your talk and for answering all the questions and for your dedication. And it's been a real pleasure listening to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all from the heart. We're a small community, we're growing, but I so appreciate each and every one of you for being here today, and that's from the heart. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations. Check out animalrebellion.org if you want to learn more about Animal Rebellion, and thanks for all you do. Good to be with you all. Take care.